Move over, Okita, because now there is another Guda servant here to challenge you for the title of Foot Fetish Servant. Hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here, bringing you a servant spotlight for Himiko's apprentice in mastering the art of the side boob, Io. We'll be examining her stats and skills, as well as going over pointers and how to utilize her effectively, and an overall grade comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 4-star servants. So if you're ready to have a Guda time, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and ring my bell so you can catch all of these servant spotlight videos as they go up, and you can help out the channel. And now, on to Io's stats. Io has a max HP of 11,756 and a max attack of 8,977, which becomes 9,874 due to her ruler class modifier. Io's HP stat ties for the highest among all SR rulers with Summer Da Vinci, and when factoring in her class resistances, she has astoundingly high HP for an SR servant overall. Her attack, on the other hand, is the lowest among all rulers, and pretty mediocre by 4-star standards. When it comes to her command cards, Io has 4 hits on her quick card, 4 hits on her arts, 3 hits on her buster, and 5 hits on her extra card. She has an NP gain rate of 0.41% and a star rate of 10.1%. Both her NP gain and star generating are quite strong due to her high hit counts and her arts and quick deck. Overall, Io has strong defensive stats with excellent utility, a stat spread that's more suited for a support despite her role as an AoE attacker. Taking a look at her skills, Io's first skill is Keto Destruction rank B. This skill increases her own arch card effectiveness for 3 turns between 20 and 30%. It also increases her damage against divine enemies for 3 turns between 30 and 50%, both of these effects depending on level, and finally it inflicts Curse for 5 turns on all enemies. Her second skill is Dark Oracle rank B, which charges her NP gauge between 20 and 30%, increases her own crit star absorption on arch cards for 1 turn between 300 and 500%, and increases the crit damage of those arch cards for 1 turn between 50% and 100%, all of these effects depending on level. And finally, her last skill is Shrine Maiden of the End rank C. This skill increases the party's attack for 3 turns between 10 and 20%, generates 10 crit stars, and increases the critical damage of wild beast allies for 3 turns between 30 and 50%, all of these effects depending on level. For her passives, Io has Magic Resistance rank B, which increases her debuff resistance by 17.5%, Territory Creation rank B, which increases her arch card effectiveness by 8%, Natural Limbs rank B, which grants her debuff immunity to poison and burn, and Kuna's Mantra rank C, which increases her quick card effectiveness by 5%, the crit damage on her quick cards by 10%, and also grants her the Wild Beast trait. Moving on to her deck and Noble Phantasm, Io has an Arts Quick deck with Quick Arts Buster, and an Arts Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm is Yoyami Kageru Suki no Mitama. It's an AoE arts attack that deals damage to all enemies with a modifier between 450 and 750% depending on NP level. It also increases Io's NP damage for 3 turns by 10% before damage, and it inflicts Evil Curse on all enemies for 3 turns, as well as inflicts Curse on all enemies for 3 turns, dealing between 1,000 and 3,000 damage depending on overcharge. As a welfare servant and a ruler, Io's Ascension mat requirements are thankfully extremely lenient. For her Ascension, she's just going to need 4 copies of the event Ascension mat, the Dusk Magatama, which you'll get for free just by completing the Guda event. As for her skill leveling, Io is going to need blue, red, and golden gems for each class, as well as 10 Magatamas and 12 Demonic Flames per skill. As someone who plays a lot of gacha games outside of just FGO, I think one of my favorite things about Fate has always been how incredibly strong the free servants that we get are. Very few gacha games give away meta units and fan favorites for free, and FGO has a really strong history of doing that, a tradition that very much lives on through our latest welfare servant, Io. Now, not to spoil the rest of this video, but Io may very well be the best welfare servant Lysangle has ever given us since the days of Kuro and Rider Kentoki. You may not notice it right away just by looking at her stats, but Io is a phenomenal arts DPS and farmer, and a large part of the reason why is because she doesn't have any glaring weaknesses and has absurdly strong stats. Her high HP combined with her resistance to most enemies makes her one of the tankiest SR servants around, and because of her high hit counts, she has obscenely good NP gain and star generating, which can easily fuel her ability to spam and loop her Noble Phantasm. Even her weakest stat, her attack, isn't as weak as it seems. After factoring in her class modifier and both the free quick and arts buffs that she gets from her passives, her damage is actually respectable. And all of these excellent stats are further boosted by a really strong and synergistic skill set that plays to Io's biggest strength, her NP gain. Io's first skill, Keto, is a 3-turn arts buff that also grants her 50% bonus damage against divine enemies and inflicts curse on all enemies. The curse gimmick that Io has isn't really relevant, so I won't talk about it much in this video, but what is very relevant is her arts and anti-divine buffs. 30% may not seem like much, but keep in mind that this arts buff does stack with her passive, so Io does have closer to a 40% buff to arts over 3 turns, which has fantastic synergy with farming teams. It effectively increases her already strong NP gain by 40% on top of her damage. So in most decent arts teams, she can easily get enough NP refund to loop consistently while this buff is active. Furthermore, the anti-divine mod stacks multiplicatively with all of her other damage buffs, and it's a massive 50% for 3 turns, giving Io a pretty strong niche against divine enemies, which do make up a sizable amount of enemy servants both in challenge quests and farming nodes. Io's second skill, Dark Oracle, is just a straight up 30% NP charge that also buffs her crit damage and her star absorb on her arts cards. I don't think you need me to tell you how strong a 30% NP battery is on an AoE arts farmer, but I will anyway. It's extremely good for consistency, and it enables a turn 1 NP without the need of any supports when paired with mana loading and an NP charge CE. The arch crit buffs are also nice to have, and they can set up for some high burst damage turns, especially when paired with that anti-divine buff and her wild beast buff, but 99% of the time you're just going to be using this skill to set up your farming. And finally, Io has a charisma-like skill with Shrine Maiden of the End. It gives the party a 20% buff to attack, generates crit stars, and gives wild beast allies a 50% crit buff. There is some really good synergy between the star generating and crit buff on this skill and the star absorb and crit buff on her second skill, so this can really help you set up some big burst damage turns if needed. And remember, Io does count as a wild beast servant due to her passive, so that 50% crit buff does apply to herself, which can make Io a very effective arch crit servant. But the most important thing about this skill is the attack buff, because it pairs multiplicatively with Io's arts buff, and it also lasts for 3 turns. So it effectively gives Io, who's already a free NP5 servant, the equivalent of a mana burst for 3 turns. Naturally, this lets her hit for some really high damage every wave, which is crucial for those 90+ and 90++ nodes. For skill leveling, make sure to level Io's Noble Phantasm charge first for obvious reasons, followed by her arts buff, and then her charisma last. Also, pick up mana loading so you can farm more consistently, followed by skill reloading and then crit damage. Io's Noble Phantasm is an AoE arts attack that increases her own NP damage by 10% for 3 turns, and it also curses all enemies. Again, the curse gimmick is a cute nod to her lore, but not really relevant for gameplay. The thing that makes this NP so amazing is that it has a good amount of hits, 4 to be exact, which means it gives a decent amount of NP refund. But even more importantly, the Noble Phantasm damage buff that it gives lingers. It lasts for 3 turns, which means that the buff stacks with itself every time Io uses her NP, and this buff occurs before damage. This is phenomenal for farming teams because it means that on turn 3, against the strongest enemy wave, Io's Noble Phantasm will also be at its strongest with a 30% buff to NP damage. 30% isn't exactly mind-blowing, but again, keep in mind this is on top of the 40% buff to arts and the 20% buff to attack, and her being a free NP5 servant. All of these stacking multiplicatively, and God help the enemy if they also happen to be divine. All of this means that Io is able to circumvent the biggest problem that a lot of extra class NP farmers have: lack of damage. In fact, as an NP5, she outdamages even NP1 Spishtar. So if you weren't fortunate enough to pick up NP2 Spishtar recently, congrats, you have a substitute. Io is tailor-made to be the ideal arts looper in Castoria teams for almost any situation, just due to her sheer NP gain consistency and her plethora of damage mods. But even outside of farming, she can pull her weight decently enough as a crit DPS. She is highly self-sufficient, with star generating, crit damage, and star absorb all built into her kit. And since many challenge quests and story-based enemies are divine, Io does does have a strong advantage against them. Also, as a ruler, she is naturally tanky. Not to say that she's Luvia levels of good, but she can be serviceable. Really, Io's only weakness is her lack of a hard defensive skill, but that doesn't really matter at all for her role as a farmer. For team comps, obviously Io excels best in Castoria teams, where she can freely and easily loop her Noble Phantasm multiple times for farming nodes. But even if you don't have Castoria, Io's NP gain is so good that she can make do with free-to-play farming supports like Paracelsus and Zufu as well. Lady Avalon is another great support choice as well, giving not only NP battery, but crit stars and damage as well. Io's bond CE is the Black Magatama. It increases the party's damage against divine enemies by 20%. This bond CE is more for flavor than practicality, so I wouldn't recommend using it. Io needs CEs that give her starting NP charge, or that significantly buff her NP damage. Black Grail is an excellent choice, especially for those 90+ nodes that require a little bit of extra damage. But Ocean Flyer, thank you for your hard work, and even K-Scope are all acceptable if you need the extra NP charge. In the future, a reward for your studies can also be useful on Io. It's not ideal, but it does grant all the starting NP charge that Io needs, along with buffs to arts and anti-evil damage. For command codes, I actually recommend codes that give Io some Star Absorb, since her skill only lasts for one turn, so anything like Lady Justice is good on her. Overall, Io is the best welfare servant we've gotten in FGO in years. She is the de facto free arts looper. Sorry Valkyrie. Her natural NP gain consistency is unmatched among most servants, which allows her to use a wide range of CEs for farming. Her damage is very high for a farming servant, thanks in large part to being a free NP5 servant with so many steroids in her kit, as well as her excellent class typing. And she can even perform well in difficult content with the right supports. Just be sure to pair her with someone who can give her extra survivability in challenge quests. All that said, Io gets an easy S from me. She's easily one of the best SR servants in the game, and one of the best farmers in the game, period. She is invaluable for free-to-play and newer players who missed out on Spishtar and Ibuki, since she's going to allow you to farm some of the most difficult content in the game very consistently. And if you're a whale who already has an NP4 Spishtar, like me, well, you can always just sit back and enjoy the side boob, or the feet, whatever you're into, because Io has something for everybody. And those are my thoughts on Io. She's one of the welfare servants that I've been most looking forward to in NA for a long time, and I think she's going to be the go-to farmer for a lot of players. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over in our Discord, chill with us on Twitch, and follow us on Twitter, all linked in the description down below, and I'll see you all in the next Servant Spotlight. Soberoni out. Later.